Welcome to the Kick It 3v3 Soccer Podcast, where soccer fans, coaches, parents, and players get insights into the beautiful game. Each week, your hosts, Danny Stratford and Brent Zico Ward, bring you some of the latest in soccer news, coaching, parenting, and conversations with guests who are making an impact in their local soccer communities or even around the world. So let's kick it.
And now a quick word about one of our partners.
Soccer families, we all know that soccer expenses add up. So here's a way to save at home and help your soccer team. We're partnering with SmartWave Solar, serving Colorado and Utah only, because they make going solar simple with 2 quick online meetings and a free no pressure quote. How do I know? I just recently had my SmartWave solar system installed. I'd been looking to add solar to my house for years, but I was tired of the misleading ads and those high pressure, you have to decide today sales tactics. A friend of mine who'd had SmartWave solar for 2 years and was super happy introduced me to SmartWave just a few months ago. SmartWave didn't use any high pressure tactics. They saved me 40% over the other quotes I got and made sure I received all the tax incentives I was due. And here's the kicker. When you book a meeting with their local rep, Steve, through Kickit, SmartWave will help sponsor your team by covering 50% to 100% of your tournament fees, or provide 3v3 custom Macron uniforms for your next 3v3 tournament. Learn more and book your meeting with Steve at kickitsoccer.com/solar. That's kickitsoccer.com/solar, spelled SOLAR. Make sure you tell them that Dan from Kickit sent you.
And now back to the show.
All right, so we had just an amazing interview yesterday, and it was our first person we've interviewed on our podcast besides each other, and I don't think we could have done any better than Alan Jones. And to explain why I'm wearing the Kansas City Chiefs jersey today, it's obvious to me. I'm from Kansas City. Alan Jones is from Kansas City as well, and so I thought it was appropriate to wear the Chiefs jersey. Plus, they play tonight in Brazil, and who loves Brazil but Zico? There you go. So we're representing Brazil and the Chiefs, kind of congruently, if you will. But back to our guest, Alan Jones. I didn't realize his pedigree as much as I do now. And after that conversation, I felt, wow, we were so lucky to have him as our first guest, a guest in general, right? So he was one of the founding members of British soccer camps, which became Challenger Sports. He's been inducted to the Kansas Hall of Fame, which, if you don't understand Kansas City and you just think Kansas, you might think Wizard of Oz and all that stuff. But really, in Kansas City, the powerhouse, a lot of the soccer there is on the Kansas side where I grew up. Sadly, because it's a more affluent suburban area, and sadly, that's where we tend to get our soccer players in the United States, until people like Alan Jones, who are putting effort into getting into the inner city, overcoming this pay-per-play type of thing, helping out kids who can't afford, where we can find talent that just isn't based on how much money you have, so you can afford to play ECNL, right? So you can afford to play MLS1 or whatever the case may be. So just an amazing coach, inducted into the Kansas Hall of Fame. Coach Matt Beasley, for the majority of his youth, I would say, sounds like from about 8 to 16 years old, who played for the U.S. national team and the KC Sporting. He also coached Seth Sinovich, who played for the KC Sporting. He was also one of my coaching mentors. Even though he's only 6 years older than me, I was 19 or 20 when I met him. Getting to be taught licensing programs by him, getting to play with him on amateur teams and coach for British soccer camps, even in my early 20s, was great. He's a Welshman who came to the States, and his story just does a great job of showing what it was like to be an entrepreneurial soccer coach back in the late 80s and early 90s, when a lot of us were trying to figure out, how do we make a living and how do we build and grow soccer across the country at the same time, just doing soccer full time. So it's a good experience. It brought me back to that. And I was actually shocked that we had similar experiences, Zico. Growing up, no formal coaching, really. Now, he had the advantage of his father, and other people probably grew up playing soccer, but his story of playing soccer every day at the end of a cul-de-sac is just like mine after school. And sadly, kids don't do that in this country still today, or is today like we did back then, which is after school, we grabbed a ball. It might have been a football, a baseball, a tennis ball, to play street hockey. whatever it was, but basketball, wiffle ball, we played every day after school. And his experience, even the part about I loved the garage was one of our best entertainments, that garage door, banging the ball against it and stuff. So it's just a great interview. He has a fascinating story. And you didn't grow up around playing on the garage. You grew up in the Brazil playing on the streets and the jungles there. But the last thing I'll say is it really brought me back. I just realized how much that experience out in Kansas City shaped who I am today, because I was not only privileged to learn from and play soccer with, coach and play soccer with some of these coaching legends in Kansas City, including Doug and Chris McLagan, Hugh Williams, Emilio John, Edmund Rugova, Sean Holmes, who's a college coach to this day, I believe, Andy Barney. And then I got to meet, so that was the coaching and playing side, get to travel with these guys on amateur teams and that kind of thing. But I also met Ron Mage, who was one of the entrepreneurial movers and shakers in Kansas City, who brought All-American Indoor Sports to Kansas City, and ultimately one of the founders of and supporters and funders, I believe, of British Soccer Camps and Challenger Sports. And I got to work for him in my early 20s. I didn't realize that how all these entrepreneurs in the sports and soccer industry really shaped me. And then here you and I are. I've owned and built soccer clubs, owned and built marketing companies. And then now here you and I are as owners of Kick It 3v3 Soccer, right? It just occurred to me how much like those seeds were planted back in the late 80s, early 90s with Alan Jones et al. Right there.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so it was just so much fun for me to reminisce and also to have so much respect for his background. Yeah,
Totally. And when you talk about his background, I'm going to say two things which sound like I'm saying, like I'm contradicting myself. I'm not one ounce. There are some people that you can meet that are teachers at heart. They don't need licensing, but it's good to go through the process. And it's almost like it's filling in the backstory. This person is a teacher by nature. They love to share knowledge, but then you fill in the backstory, let's say, by taking coaching courses and learning how to organize and structure a practice and to have a focus and stay on point, let's say. And saying I heard a long time ago is one team, one theme. I might have point, I'm going to teach this today. And you know what this is? It's point one. And I'm going to go point one, point 1A, point 1B, point 1C. Oh, I didn't finish point 1C, but I introduced it. And staying on task, let's say. So like an example, something that Jonesy shared with us the other day was having a UEFA A license, which is amazing. That's pretty much as good as it gets, the highest level, let's say, it can get. I'm going to say he didn't have that back in 89. As he was driving 55,000 miles, he said, his first year here, over 1,000 miles, to make soccer a living and go and to really sow the seeds for eventually, and that wasn't what he was thinking, Kansas Sports Hall of Fame. He was just busy making soccer a living. But now you're talking about going back to Europe and getting a UEFA A license, which is about, again, as high as it gets. My point being, though, is he didn't get that UEFA license or this high licensing period and then become a coach. He was already a teacher. And while coaching for a living, he's going back and filling in the back of how to structure practices easier. Because one thing I'm sure that he did, and we all did, is it's easier coaching, especially if you played, and he played. We heard about his extensive background playing. It's easy to run a skills session, let's say. But then to run other sessions, which are multiple people, players, small groups, larger groups, teams sharing a ball, it becomes more tactical. But you know what? And this will tie into his coaching advice. I always think, I don't care if I'm coaching college players. I start off with one ball per player pretty much every time, period. You got to always just be, because nothing's more fun than the ball. By the way, I hate running. I don't like sweat dripping in my eyes. You know what I mean? But I love the ball. And I would do that for the ball. What I love is that I would use the word, he was ball-centric. And my brother Tito and I, when we coached him and we wrote up a program together for 7 years, we spoke about making ball hogs and show offs. And we're trying to raise our kids to be good, wonderful citizens, but when they're 6, 7, and 8 years old, they're socially clueless. They pick their nose. They're clueless. Make them ball hogs and show offs, because when they're 10 and 11 and 12, they will be socialized into becoming more of a team player. But the problem is we get people trying to teach kids the pass and move when they're 6 and 7 and 8 years old. And that's beyond them. They're egotistical. They're single task oriented. They're simpletons. A lot of husbands are like this too. But what I love that Jonesy said was it all had to being ball centric. I want one player with the ball as much as we can. You know what? I carry that period all the way through, period. You know,
No, you know what?
If I play, I want to play around with the ball a little bit before we eventually kick off. I want to just take my ball and dribble around a little bit. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, don't be sorry at all. But just chiming in on that, when I was coaching for a living, and I had, I think, 4 competitive teams I coached, and I coached Shawnee Mission Northwest High School soccer, and then Olathe South High School soccer. Both one year we were runners up. First year at Northwest, we won state. I wasn't the head coach then, but at Olathe South, we were runners up, then won state the next year, and I was assistant varsity coach then. But I found myself exactly what you said. My 7-year-old team, we started off practice with the ball, playing tag in a square with the ball. I started my high school practices like that because it scaled up. Everybody's faster, quicker. I might make the square bigger. I might have kept it the same size because it's tighter and more challenging. And I'm looking at these high school kids playing tag while they're dribbling the ball. That's good. That helps me. Even I remember in my 20s, when I coached them, I would do that with them. And I improved as a soccer player in my 20s because I was engaging in these 7-year-old soccer drills day in and day out that I was. Now, to be fair, my high school team, we're going to progress from that to give and goes or to 4-on-2s or 6-on-4s. We're going to progress that quickly through practice. Whereas the 7-year-olds, that might be all we do is play tag with the ball for an hour. But you're absolutely right. And what was the other thing that Alan said that you and I talked about last time was communication with the parents. And people think that parents are pains in the butt. I've heard the expression, give me a team of orphans and I'll be a happy coach. And I used to think that a little bit, but in hindsight, and what I started doing more recently was I really communicated with my parents about, hey, this is our focus. It's not on winning this game. It's on developing people, developing soccer players and meeting them where they are and helping them be better. And like I think we talked about in the last podcast, we talked about yesterday, but with Alan, was that my parents would be cheering as we're losing 6-2 against a team that should beat us 15-0 because they're head taller than us at 7 years old. But my parents of the kids I'm coaching are like, wow, my kid's getting better every week. This is amazing. Meanwhile, the team that's beating us 6-2, the parents are mad and angry and yelling at their kids for not beating us worse. And that came from the coach. That came from you remember that incident? That was the only coach I ever complained about in the whole history of soccer because he started yelling at my players. He was so mad they were barely beating us. And that really demonstrated when you're the coach, you can create a culture, not just for your team and your kids, but if you include the parents, let them watch your practices. Why not? Let them engage, listen to your speeches with the kids. Not everything, not all the time. You don't want to be disruptive, but the more they're involved, you can give. Let's face it. Most of the parents of the kids we coach are usually educated, intelligent. Even if they don't have degrees, they're usually successful, intelligent, good parents, committed to their kids. Yep. And I think that 9 out of 10 of them fall in line with what that head coach says, and the ones that don't, you don't want them on your team anyway because it becomes a cancer. And so it's really important to communicate. I really love that you said about that. And I know you and I have had that same feeling.
Can I go back and say one more thing?
Sure.
I took a coaching course. It was a large coaching course. People flew in from all over the country. And my activity was I played a game called Dalmatians. And these are adults. These are coaches. They flew in from around the country. So apparently they were making money or doing it for a living.
Was this back with the NSCAA when you were doing stuff
Correct.
with them?
Now the USC, NSCAA back then. Correct.
Yeah, and tell me about for NSCAA. You had a very respectable, coveted, an excellent position with them. What were you doing with them at that time, Zico?
At that time, I was taking their courses, and then eventually I really got most all of their courses. I got a master coach diploma. The first year they did it as a trial thing and what have you. I was a lab rat, I guess, one of the lab rats. And they were very inviting to different ways people did things, different points of view, what have. Eventually, there's probably a right and wrong or a more successful and less successful way. But when I took this course, my first sort of activity, let's say pretty early on, right after a warm up, was adults. Again, they flew in from all over. So they were getting paid to do this, or they were making a living out of it or something. Was everyone tucked a penny into the back of their shorts, and then they were dribbling a ball while 3 or 4 people were chasing them in a large open area because it was speed dribbling and trying to pull their penny out. And it's called Dalmatians. And these 3 or 4 adults who flew in to take this course were the Cruella de Villes. And after that, the guy who was actually evaluating me walked up to me, Paul Payne, walked up to me and bumped me as I was getting a drink of water or whatever, and said, "Hey, man, I heard that you ran a very good session." And that's the session I do with 6-year-olds all the time. But it was heavy on touching the ball, and it just created an environment where they had to do that technical thing that I was focused on. Let me say one last thing. When you date somebody, if they don't call you for a day or 2 or respond to your last 16 texts, joking, you fill that in with negative thoughts. And that's where I think sometimes the parents do need to be involved, because the most important thing in their life you're coaching their child. And if you don't keep them updated, just return one of their 15 texts. If you don't keep them updated, they fill in the blanks with negative thoughts. Guys, negative thoughts, they're free, unfortunately. You got to work hard to make them positive. And so if you exclude the parents, first of all, let's be honest, you don't have a job. But if you exclude the parents, you get parents getting worked up. So I love that Paul said that Jonesy said that, because that's how I feel. Everyone's got to, we're all pulling the same way too. Everyone has the same thoughts going in the same direction. So anyway, that was wisdom. That was wisdom more than anything from Jonesy.
And it was, and I'll caveat that by saying we're talking about youth soccer coaching, and maybe even through high school to a degree. High school, kid's still a minor, you're still concerned about them. We've seen that go too far with what happened with Berhalter and Reyna's family, Claudio Reyna's family, where it seemed inappropriate for his parents to go on national news, social media, all that stuff. That was a little overboard. At some point, you got to let the kid out of harbor.
Land the helicopter and get out of the helicopter. Right. Helicopter parenting. Yes.
Yeah. And the truth is, we don't know those relationships and how that all went down. But as an outsider, it looked like, man, maybe the parents probably should have not stepped in at that moment. Yeah.
Correct.
And so anyway, yeah, we could go on for. We'd love the conversation with Jonesy, and we think you're gonna love it too. It's so funny because he has a dry British sense of humor. Oh, sorry, dry Welsh sense of humor. He would not want to be called British.
With English for sure.
Yeah. But there you go. Yeah, English, I guess, is the word I was looking for. Kind of a neophyte and that kind of stuff. But yeah, listen to the story he tells and the experience he had. It really paints a picture of what it was like back in the late 80s, early 90s, building a soccer organization, coming to America like so many people from the UK did. He even talks about the difference between the Brazilian coaches that he trained and the UK coaches that he trained and the American coaches that he trained. So anyway, with that, we do want to say we really are looking forward to, we got some tournaments coming up, not Tulsa, but Oklahoma City coming up October 4th. We have up in Conifer, we have a Halloween tournament. And of course we have our New Year's Eve, New Year's Day tournament coming up. And then we're looking to do something big in the end of February, early March in Texas. Hopefully we'll have some more information on that next week. I'm traveling to meet with the Texas City Visitor, one of the city visitors bureaus in Texas, to see if we can get a big event scheduled, finally pinned in for end of February, early March. That said, we used to have before Zico and I bought the company, before COVID, Kick It 3v3 Soccer used to have a strong presence in Kansas City. We'd love to get back in there. So if you're in Kansas City and you're looking for a side hustle, looking to bring 3v3 soccer to your club as a fundraiser, to your hospital organization as a fundraiser, your high school as a fundraiser, we would love to come out there. We're looking for good connections, good relationships in Kansas City. We have them up in Iowa, Nebraska,
South Dakota.
Oklahoma, Texas, but Kansas City, even though I know so many people there, boy, everybody I know is super busy, and we'd love to find some good opportunities to bring out some 3v3 soccer tournaments there. With that, let's get on with the interview with one of what I've come to think of as really one of Kansas City's icons in soccer coaching, and a quiet icon. Yeah, the opposite of Andy Barney, who's not a quiet icon, and we love Andy Barney, but man, that guy's a go-getter, type A extrovert. And Alan is one of those quiet, I think, mostly quiet leaders. Speaks when he needs to speak, and is not boastful like me. He's more like you, Zico, very humble. But wow, I was so impressed with his background. So we hope that you enjoy our first interview, our first guest on the Kick It 3v3 podcast. We have some amazing guests coming up in the coming weeks that are just as cool, we think, that you'll love hearing from. But with that, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
We are so excited to be meeting with Alan Jones today, the COO of Challenger Sports. And we're excited to learn about him, about Challenger Sports, about his history in soccer, how he came to the U.S., his insights into college youth soccer and player development, and then also talk about World Cup soccer, get some of his views, see who he's rooting for. I could probably guess, but see who he might be rooting for World Cup. But with that, so welcome to the podcast, Alan. Thank you so much for joining.
No problem. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah,
Thank you,
and Zico, I'll let you take it from here.
So, Alan, I'm guessing you're not from Texas originally, but where exactly were you raised? And then what are your first memories of playing football when you were a kid? And speak about the style you saw, the style you watched, the style you started to play or form from a young age.
Yeah, I'm from South Wichita originally, as you could tell from the accent. But in reality, I'm from Wales in the UK. I'm from a little town called Tywyn, which is right on the coast, population about 4,000 people, predominantly Welsh speaking. So I was brought up, both my parents, my sister, I've got one sister, all speak Welsh. And like I said, soccer, when I was growing up, I was born in 1961, so a long time ago. First memories of soccer really were just playing in the street. That's how we were all brought up. I lived in a cul-de-sac. My house was right at the end of the street. I had a brick wall, which is about 4 foot tall. And I was lucky because we lived on the end of the cul-de-sac. We also had a garage. For hours on end every day, I would just play against either the wall or the garage door with a soccer ball or a tennis ball and just kicking the ball back and forth. That was pretty much it. When I was growing up, we didn't have any structured soccer, particularly in primary school or elementary school as it was. And then when we went to high school, we started high school at 11 years old. We didn't have any club teams, not at the youth level back then. So like I said, my first structured soccer was in high school. And again, when I look back to those days and compare to what modern day soccer and coaching is all about, we had, as much as we had a great physical education teacher, we didn't have structured soccer sessions as you see now. It was just a case of going out there and playing. And like I said, street soccer back home was by far what we spent most of our time doing, just getting a bunch of mates or friends together, putting down some goals, whether it was whatever you had at hand. Usually an article of clothing would make the goals, and you just play in the streets with your buddies. So that was predominantly what I did. In high school, I was lucky that I did get picked to play for my county team, which is the state team. And then I also got picked to play for North Wales Schools and also for Central Wales Youth. So the only disadvantage with that was geographically where I lived, North Wales. And again, I don't know many people are familiar with Wales, but I live, Tywyn is right at the southern end of the North Wales boundary. I'm literally 5 miles away from Central Wales. So as much as I got picked to play several times for the North Wales Schools, I never actually got a chance to play. because they would inform the physical education teacher back then in the high school, hey, we want Alan to play on Thursday. He needs to be up at Chester or whatever it was going to be by 9 o'clock in the morning, which was about a 2.5 hour drive minimum. And it's all 2-lane highways through the mountains and everything else. Both my parents were working, but my dad was self-employed. He was an electrician. My mother worked in a local shop. So neither of those could take the day off to take me up to play. The physical education teacher obviously couldn't do it because he was teaching. That was very frustrating, that as much as I got picked to play, I never had a chance to play just because of where I lived. And then for Central Wales, when I got picked to play for that group, the manager at the time owned a local soccer store, and I just didn't agree with his philosophy. All he was concerned about was winning trophies and getting his photo in the local paper. And as much as I got picked to play, I just made the decision, and I was about probably 16 at the time, not to play, because for me, that's not what I wanted to do. It wasn't winning was an important part, obviously, but I wanted to have fun and enjoy it. So that decision didn't go down too well with my father. He actually didn't speak to me for 3 weeks after I made that decision. He wasn't happy with that. My dad was a very good soccer player in his day. He was in the Territorial Army back in the 50s and played on a very high level team in the army, and actually played alongside one of the Busby Babes. That was his claim to fame. But one of my proudest memories was playing against him. He was probably in his late 50s at the time. And we played a game just in the local town, and we had one of the biggest crowds we ever had, which was probably about 100 people. So not a massive crowd by any means, but that was one of the highlights of my career, playing against my dad.
That's cool.
That's awesome. You know, it's funny what you said about the garage. I grew up in Lenexa, Kansas, and we'll get into that a little bit. And I remember beating the crap out of the garage. And the garages used to be made out of this really thick, heavy wood. And now you can't kick a soccer ball against a garage. You'll destroy it, and the HOA will make you replace it. But that we used to, man, that garage door was just, that was an entertainment. That was like one of our, whether you're going to play handball or maybe practice tennis against it, or soccer. It seemed like that was go out and play in the garage for an hour. Your parents didn't seem to care. That's funny. What kind of, and it's fascinating. I'm not going to talk about me, but similarly, growing up in the 70s, I didn't have much coaching in Kansas City at all. All about playing with my friends in the streets. So that's fascinating. And for Zico, he grew up in the jungles of Brazil playing soccer. No structured coaching. None of us had structured coaching in at least the first 10 years of our lives. We had pretty much no coaching at all, which is fascinating compared to how things have become so contrived in the U.S. since then, and probably worldwide to huge degree.
Definitely.
But what kind of style of play would you say there was? Because Zico had asked that, I kind of wanted to hear that before I moved on to the next thing.
Probably at the time, I didn't understand what styles of play were. Like I said, back in those days, we had a TV, but it was in black and white. I used to watch, and again, you didn't have that many live games on TV in those days, back in the 60s. And I lived, the closest professional team to me was Liverpool. So I used to go up there when I was in high school and I probably watched about half a dozen games in what was the Real Cop at the time. We used to get on a bus, the 2-hour drive up to Liverpool, watch the game. And again, those were totally different. Once you were in the Cop, you were in the Cop. There was no movement. It was standing only, and you were literally shoulder to shoulder, tens of thousands of people. And once you got in there, that was it until the game was finished. There was no thought of going to the restroom. Going halftime, the crowd would move to get a beer or a sandwich or a cup of tea or something like that. But in the game itself, there was no movement whatsoever. And unless there was a goal scored, because obviously if you've ever seen any TV footage or movie footage of the Cop back in those days, if Liverpool scored, the whole crowd moved down. So the safest place to stand was in front of one of the metal stanchions, because at least then you had some protection behind you that you weren't going to get just pushed down. And I did see a lot of people injured, but it was pretty uncomfortable at times, because you'd be standing there and you'd feel this warm sensation running down the back of your legs as the person behind was doing his thing, so to speak. So it was entertaining times back then. That's all you knew. So It was what we were all used to.
I have to ask because I avoided watching that show Welcome to Wrexham for like the first
Hmm.
year, and then a friend of
Yep.
mine was like, "You got to watch it," and I fell in love with it. I really liked that
Hmm.
show, and just wondering if you had a perception or perspective of that team growing up, and what it is now.
Yeah, Wrexham was actually, my wife was born in Wrexham. Her little village is probably about 20 minutes away from there. And Wrexham was probably my most local team. I didn't go and watch Wrexham play because they weren't a very good team at that time, but they did have some very well-known players who played for the Welsh national team. And Wrexham was the stadium where they played all the Welsh national team games. So I saw a lot of World Cup qualifiers. I remember the one with Joe Jordan when we played Scotland, where he scored a goal with his hand and all that sort of stuff. So again, it was a great experience. I remember the one time we drove up there. My dad used to go all the time, so I'd go with him and a couple of buddies. We'd go up, park the car in any street that you could. They didn't have big parking lots back then. And I remember a couple of kids coming up to us as we were locking the door and just about to head off to the stadium, saying, "Hey," and these kids couldn't have been more than 10 years old, saying, "Hey, mister, can you pay us £1 if we look after the car?" My dad said, "No, we'll be all right. We've got a dog in there." And the kid, as quick as you can say, "Can your dog put out fires?" That was a pretty tough crowd back then. But like I said, it was all part of the experience.
That's awesome. That's cool to hear. I wanted to ask you this next question, which is about coming to the United States. Two parts. When and why did you come to the United States? And for crying out loud, how did you end up in Kansas City, where I was?
Yeah, I was, after I finished college, I met with my wife in college up in Bangor, North Wales. I did an honours degree in physical education for high school. After finishing college in '84, I got a teaching job in Kidderminster in England, which is and still is the home of the carpet industry. I taught physical education there in a high school. We had about 1,200 kids, and then saw an advertisement in the local, what they call the Times Educational Supplement, which was a national newspaper that went out to teachers in colleges and schools and universities, and just saw a job advertised there, coaching opportunities in the United States. So I applied for the job. I tried a couple of times to come out for the summer to work for Umbro Soccer Schools, as they were known back then, but didn't get the opportunity. And I'd gotten about as far as I was going to get in the teaching world back there. I was physical education teacher. I was head of careers, head of year, looking after about 200 16 and 17-year-olds in terms of their social welfare. So I thought, hey, why don't I apply? We'd never been to the US before. So applied for the job, got interviewed down in Cardiff by a guy called Andy Barney, who I know you know very well. I managed to survive a 3-hour interview with Andy, which was entertaining. At the end of that, he said, "Look, there's a job available for All American Indoor Sports." At the time, they were looking to build about 60 indoor soccer facilities all over the US. They had 2 in Kansas City. And he said, "Look, we're going to take you on and bring you out, and you can be one of the directors of coaching in a facility that we're hoping to build in Ohio." So this happened in about January, I think it was, of '89. And then in March, we had to put our resignation in. I got offered the position, accepted it. And then both my wife and myself had to resign from our teaching positions. We did. And then about a week later, Andy called me back and said, "Oops, sorry, there's been a change of plan. The planning permission for the Ohio facility has been refused. At the moment, we don't have a job for you." So I said, "That sounds great, because I don't have a job here anymore either, because we've both resigned." So he just said, "Let's do this. Why don't you come out to Kansas City, where we're based, and coach the summer. If we don't have anything full-time available, then, you can come up, go back to the UK and see if you can get another job, or if whatever the first job becomes available is yours." So that's what we did. We finished teaching on the Friday, drove down to London, flew out on the Saturday on Pan American, which will tell you how long ago that was. Got into Kansas City on the Saturday, and I was coaching in Fort Leavenworth on one of the camps that first week. And at the end of the week, Andy came to me. We were living with Andy for the first 3 weeks. We were here in Alexa. And he came and said, "Look, there's going to be a change of plan. I'm going to be leaving All American and setting up the Legends Club, continuing with the Legends Club and doing some other things. So if you want a job, the national which sounds very official and very large. The National Director of Camps job is available. So I accepted that, and we've been here in Kansas City ever since.
Wow, I never got to hear that story. How many? And I want to circle back to that in a second. But first, I wanted to get an idea of how many kids do you have? What are their ages? And boys, girls?
Got 4 kids and 2 grandkids. My eldest is Sean. He lives in Denver. He's a plumber. Got married this summer with a beautiful girl, Erica. They were in high school together here in Kansas City. They both moved out to Denver independently and reunited out there and got married in Croatia this summer. So we had a great time out there with that. So he's plumbing. And then Erica works for Caterpillar. She's one of their media people. And then my daughter's 34. She lives here in Kansas City. She's married to a guy called Hunter. They're both in the IT world, and they've got 2 kids, Murphy, who's 8, and Hugh, who's 4. So I've got 2 grandkids there. And then I've got twin boys, Owen and Reese, or Owen and Rice. That was one of probably the unfortunate things we did when we had kids, was to give them Welsh names with Welsh spellings. So Gareth's full name is, my eldest is Gareth Sean Jones, but we spell Sean Sion. Right. So everybody calls him Sion. So he really loves that. And then my daughter's name is Kerry, but we spell it Ceri. So everybody pronounces her Seri. And then Reese is good. Reese they call Rice. And then Owen is the other twin. Yeah, he's, at least people can pronounce his name properly, which is great.
Yeah. Screw up that spelling, did they?
Yeah. Sorry, Zico.
The Welsh didn't screw up that spelling, did they?
No, they didn't screw that one up. No. But yeah, so Kerry lives here in Kansas City. Reese lives in San Francisco. He works with the earthquakes. He did an internship there, and he's still there at the moment. So he actually did his degree in Cardiff during COVID, which was a bit of a challenge because he had to come back for 2 years and do his initial degree online. But his degree was in sports performance and analysis. And then he stayed on after COVID had finished, went back to Cardiff and did his master's in sports broadcasting. And then Owen is working here in Kansas City, was working for Challenger in the warehouse, but he's now interviewing for other positions. Yeah, that's the family.
That's awesome. My dog's name, I don't know if you know this, I have a Rottweiler, his name is Moldrich. And I rescued him like 2 weeks before I was going to Croatia for vacation. Stayed in Old Town Dubrovnik, went to Split. Went to Hvar. I toured the capital city, did all that. It was during the Game of Thrones, and so I got to do the Game of Thrones tour and all that. There's a funny story. I'm heading to the airport and there's a cab driver, right? We're talking about football, and I bring up Edmund Rugova, who you and I coached and played with back in the day, right?
Yeah.
And back when it was all Yugoslavia, it was one thing. And Edmund played for the Yugoslavian national team. I know, and one of the most brilliant players either one of us ever played with or against. Smoking and drinking coffee, he still was faster than everybody. But there's a funny story. So I told the taxi driver my dog's name was Modric, and he acted offended. That was like an insult to Modric.
No way.
To Modric. And people in the US say Modric, so we call him Modric. But then people will ask me, is he named after Modric? They'll usually ask me that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he had 2 dogs. I said, what are your dogs' names? One of them was a Croatian name, I don't remember, but one of them was named Steven. And I was like, why is he named Steven? And he goes, he's named after my favorite actor of all time, Steven Seagal. And I was like, okay, as much as you think it's an insult to Modric for me to name my dog after Modric, it's an insult to your dog to name him after Steven Seagal, one of the worst actors and action stars in the history of our country. But that was hilarious. But yeah, anyway, but that's amazing. And I didn't know you were Welsh. It's funny, because it was called British Soccer Camps back. We'll tell you about that in a minute, but it was called British Soccer Camps back in the day. And you guys, it was funny. I'd say you all identified as British, right? Until we went out after playing, and then we would go have a beer, and then you'd start to realize who was Scottish, who was Irish, who was Welsh, who was whatever. And then, of course, the more beers, the thicker and the more originating the accents became. And Welsh the more beers a Welshman has, the harder it is to understand.
Yeah.
Like Hugh Williams is a good example of that. If you
Yeah.
had a few beers, you couldn't understand what he was saying. But anyway, and in fact, I wanted to move on to, before we move on to the next topic I wanted to talk to you about, and coaching and all that kind of stuff. I'm curious, if you raised your kids in soccer,
Hmm.
what was that experience like? And what kind of all three of us here have raised our kids in soccer. Zico
Yeah.
had kids older, so he's still in the middle of that with I think a 12 and 14-year-old or 11, 14-year-old. But what was your experience as someone who didn't want to be like your dad, who was pissed off if his son didn't do what he wanted soccer-wise? You didn't want to have that passed on to your kids, I'm
Yeah.
sure. When I did some of that to my oldest son when I was a young parent, I'm trying to live vicariously through my son. But what advice would you have for soccer parents in general? What was your experience, and what did you learn being a soccer coach and a soccer parent, and maybe mistakes you made, things you would have done better? What are your thoughts on those topics?
I think as a parent, like I said, my dad was vocal. He'd come and watch every single game I played, whether I was in school or when I played club. And there were several times during the game that we had words, I'll put it politely. But yeah, I always vowed after I finished playing and started having kids that I wouldn't push them too hard. Out of the four kids, Sean, my eldest, did play and did enjoy it, played in high school, played club here in KC. My daughter played, we use the term probably loosely, played as a goalkeeper. I think her mother wanted her to at least be, involved actively in something. So obviously with a dad coaching soccer full time, she got involved in that. It was more of a social thing for her more than anything else. And then the twin boys both played. Reese was a very, very good player, very technical player, and played club here, played for the university for the first year in Cardiff. They actually had, even though they was university, they have a professional. Their first squad is professional because they play in the Welsh Premier League. So they're dubbed a professional team. But he didn't like the culture. Unlike his dad, who, a bit like you, Dan, I remember after playing, we used to enjoy the social element and having a few beers and all that stuff. And Reece just wasn't into that. So he quit playing after the first year and he just wanted to focus on his studies. And then Owen played club, never really into it. Again, it was more my wife wanted him to get involved in something physical. So again, enjoyed the social aspect. But like I said, I always vowed never to push them too hard. If they didn't want to play, then that was fine. Being a physical education teacher, I wanted to make sure that they took part in different activities when they were younger. So again, they took part, both of the twin boys of black belt karate. My daughter did gymnastics and a few other things. And my eldest didn't really do too much out of soccer. But for me, I know I didn't really do much else. I was pretty fortunate when I was a kid and in high school. I was also a pretty good rugby player, both in high school and when I went to college. I played more rugby than I did soccer. And that was primarily because our head lecturer at college was on the Welsh Rugby Union board. So if you were a physical education main student like I was, and you had some talent, you were pretty much forced to play in the rugby team. But I did play on the college soccer team as well, which I really enjoyed. But then when I left school, I played both soccer and rugby. I'd play for a season or two in one and then just changed. I'd play the other. So I was pretty fortunate. And I think I really enjoyed that flexibility. So like I said, I've always been a big supporter, particularly at a younger age, that kids should take part in as many activities as is possible, because I think forcing kids into one activity at too early an age can be detrimental.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's because I was the same way. I played very briefly high school basketball, but I played tennis. I was a brown belt in judo, did judo tournaments. And then my kids, it's funny, I think because of time and how much life just seems so busy, and they don't go out and play on their own as much as we did when we were kids.
No.
So it was harder because every day after school, when I was in elementary school, we played American football, we played street hockey, we played soccer, football. we played wiffle ball or baseball. We were always doing something different,
Right.
and we would almost vote on it. What are we going to do today? But the kids don't go out and do that. And it's funny, as my kids got older and they played soccer so long, but they got to high school, they started playing other sports, and they're like, "Hey, Dad, I'm actually pretty good at basketball and all these things." And partially because if you're good at soccer, it's so good for your coordination, your physicality, and all that you can adapt to a lot of different sports,
Yep.
volleyball, all these things. Yeah. But I agree with you. That's a tough thing to handle in the U.S., right? Maybe all over the world. I'm not sure. Do you have any? What's the number one advice? Sounds like not pressuring, maybe trying to make sure your kids have fun and find their own path. Those seem, and music. I got my kids into music, doing different things. I think is important as well.
Oh, yeah.
Because 0.001% of them are going to make money playing soccer.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you really can't be that way. All right. So let's talk about. I want to talk about your coaching because and I was so excited we reconnected over the last couple of years. Bumped into Peter Arch online. Found out he moved just a few miles away from me here in south of Denver, Colorado. And when I look at my coaching mentors, one of the top ones was Doug McClagan, because he really took me under his wing. And I always tell young coaches today, I bumped into somebody at the coaches convention in Chicago. "Oh, I'm just coaching the 8 and 9-year-olds." And I said to them, you know what? That's where you really learn how to teach.
Yeah.
Any ex-pro can come out and coach a high school team or a college team. They can't all coach 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds. It's that, but someone who can coach 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds can coach high school, and it doesn't work the other way around. So Doug you guys started me out at All-American Indoor Sports coaching young, and I felt like I was Doug's right-hand man for the longest time. But I also assisted you and Peter Arch. Emilio John and I had a great relationship. In fact, he let me coach his son for a while. Darren Carley, remember Darren? He was just a couple of years older than me, but he took me under his wing. And then, of course, Andy Barney, who's like the controversial person, but did a lot of good stuff for soccer in Kansas City. And then sidebar, when I moved to Denver, one of the first people I bumped into and started coaching with was Zico, Brent Ward. We grew up in Brazil, and we were very much kindred spirits because we liked coaching youth soccer. We loved teaching, we loved developing, which is really what I learned from you guys. And while his impression previously might have been that anybody from the UK was about kicking the ball really far and long that way even, but I know that wasn't true with how you guys taught me how to teach kids. It was a lot of one-on-one, one player, one ball relationship training sessions. So I had a brilliant foundation I got from all of you guys. And then Zico and I became very good friends. And quite honestly, when I moved to Denver, I thought, man, I've learned so much coaching youth soccer. I know everything there is to know, I think, at one point. And then I met Zico, and I was like, wow, I got a lot to learn still. And that felt good to know that I still had a lot to learn. And then I realized even today I'm learning. I learn every time you coach, you learn something new about yourself, which is true. But anyway, I wanted to put that plug in for you guys because just so much respect for you guys now. And thankful that you came into Kansas City, because we were the stepchild to St. Louis, had no coaching in the area, not great soccer. And you guys really, if it weren't for you guys, I probably would not have been the soccer player, had the opportunities I had and the coach that I had and all that stuff. So I wanted to get a big shout out to you guys. And you talked a little bit about, so the All-American Indoor Sports thing didn't work out. And I remember, because I worked at All-American and became a marketing manager there. Tell me about how British soccer camps came to be, and then that segue into Challenger, the transition. I remember there being British soccer camps, and then I remember there being Challenger soccer camps, but I didn't remember how that came to be. But so tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, when I first came over in '89, it was All-American Indoor Sports camps at the time, with Andy and Pete were there. And the premise behind that is we had 2 facilities here in Kansas City, one in Lenexa, one in Bannister. Actually, in 3. We had the one in Overland Park as well, just for kicks. So I was working in those facilities. I started coaching with Andy, with the Legends, with his Q109 Rockers, which was great, and met Andy's philosophy on coaching. And again, living with him for 3 weeks. It was probably the longest 3 weeks of my life, because we'd have conversations in the evening, and Andy, it's just like, you've never seen anybody as passionate about the game in all your life. And he's very passionate about the individual technique stuff.
I remember in someone's apartment, we'd play Then we go have a beer at the pub. Then we end up in someone's apartment, and Dave Morrow would be there,
Right, yeah.
another guy, yeah, right?
Yeah.
And I remember falling asleep, sitting up, listening to all you guys talking about soccer till 3 a.m. The stories, and the headbutting stories that Andy Barney
Yeah.
told.
I learned
The flying
that-
headbutting stories, I should say.
I learned after a couple of weeks not to disagree with Barney, because if you disagreed with him, he'd talk for another hour and a half. So it was just, you just learn to nod your head and agree with him, and then eventually he tired himself out. But
Yeah.
no, so like I said, that's how we started. And the idea was, obviously, with the indoor facilities, they were packed over the winter but empty during the summer. So the idea was, that's why it was called All American Indoor Sports Camps, was to bring kids into the facilities in the summer to help generate revenue for the company. So that's how we started. And when I first came out, Pete Archer joined in February of '89. When I started in July, we had 40 locations. I think we had about 25 coaches that we brought over from the UK, and we coached about 800 kids. And then from there, we formed British Soccer Camps. We had a guy, Jim Jorgensen, who was one of the investors with Ron Mach, the owner, and we just decided to expand. So we took on 2 guys full time, Andy Bennett, who's from the UK, and Mike Vincent, another guy from the UK. We put Andy down in Atlanta, and Mike first moved to Tulsa, lived there for a few years, and then moved down to Dallas. We started British Soccer Camps, and back in those days, I was having to do everything. We had a computer, which was basically a word processor that you worked in MS-DOS, and it had the green writing on it. So
Yeah.
I was doing everything. I was doing the sales calls, doing the marketing. We had brochures. I had to print off thousands of labels, peel them off, stick them off the brochures, send them off to the clubs, do promotional clinics and all that sort of stuff. And the first 12 months I was here, I drove 55,000 miles, but I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. I'd had no sales experience, no marketing experience. So literally, it was a great 12 months because my wife was with me, but because of the visa situation, she couldn't work. We used to travel together, and my typical weekly schedule would be I'd drive down to Bentonville, Arkansas, 6 hours, do a 30-minute presentation, drive back to Kansas City. Next day, I'd be off to Grand Island, Nebraska, do the same thing there. And I was then a couple of days later, I'd be down in Dallas for a couple of days and just driving all over the Midwest. But it's having not been involved in sales, and now I know everything about trying to schedule your sales trips and everything else to work smarter, not harder. I certainly put the hours in and did a lot of work with the state association. Andy was director of coaching for Kansas at the time. So he got me involved in that, and I started doing F licenses and E licenses and D licenses. And really, that was a great way and I learned so much from Andy in terms of coaching methodology and everything else, that it was a great way to create relationships with other coaches. And that's how really I helped grow the business on the British soccer side, through meeting people and spending time with them, because obviously you didn't have the internet back in those days. So it was the typical hard landline telephones and meeting face to face. So that's how we started, and we gradually grew from there.
One thing I will say before you go into the next thing, in hindsight, it just occurred to me that Andy Barney, Peter Arch, Ron Mage, Jim Jorgensen, all those guys, entrepreneurs, right?
Oh, yeah.
Had a strong business and business development mind.
Yeah.
I started my own club, and Andy Barney was one of the people who inspired me to do that, because he hung a shingle, started a club. I did it. Tom Mura then started one, and then I actually had ex-professional players calling me, because I was one of the first Americans to start my own club. Ex-pro players calling me saying, "How'd you start your club? How did that work?" And so I didn't just learn the coaching side, but I was inspired by the kind of entrepreneurial. I started doing my own camps. I coach for British Soccer Camps every once in a while. But it was a good group of business people, entrepreneurial people, and also in the soccer industry ahead of your time, which is probably how and why Challengers got as big as it did, because of all of those kind of business mentors that you had. So tell me about the transition from British Soccer Camps over to Challenger.
Yeah, that happened in 1997. We had an opportunity. We just felt at the time that we did a great job on the camps, but a lot of the feedback we had from the clubs we were working with was, hey, we really enjoyed the camp experience, but it's 1 week out of the year. What can you do to help us on a more year-round basis? And obviously at the time, clubs, were much less structured than what they are now. They didn't have full-time directors of coaching. They were predominantly volunteers. Back in the back in the 90s, most of the coaches were mums and dads who had a fairly decent idea of the technical side of the game because they were watching videos, reading books. Some had played at high school, not many at college, but they really lacked the tactical knowledge of the game because they never not played at that decent level. Back in 1997, we had an opportunity to take on two guys from what was back then North American Soccer Camps, the largest soccer camp company in the country. So we had the opportunity to take on Derek Shaw and Paul Lawrence. Derek was head of sales for North American camps, soccer camps, and Paul was the CEO. We brought him into Kansas.City and said, look, we want to diversify and offer other services. So we brought him into town and drank lots of beers with him, and they made the decision, moved down to Kansas.City. And at that time, we just said, we had some more investment from Jim, and Ron was really trying to grow the company. So we formed Challenger Sports Corporation, which is really the umbrella company. But then underneath Challenger, we still had British Soccer Camps, which was the camps division. We started off what we call the academy division, where we embedded coaches or trainers in communities for a season. So they would stay with local families and work within clubs for a whole season on a daily basis and weekly basis. So we started that division. We then started the tours division that Hugh Williams obviously had been with the company at the time. He was very big into the tours. And then we started on a very small scale on the tournaments. So the whole idea of Challenger was to become the total soccer solution, if you like, to clubs where we could offer pretty much everything. And then we got involved in the teamwear business. Ron knew a local guy here in town who had a company called Union Jacks, who you probably remember. So we got involved and purchased that company and started the teamwear business. So yeah, that's really how Challenger Sports started. And at the height of the camps business back in 2016, we coached 120,000 campers and we had 1,200 staff. We purchased a company from Brazil called Tetra Brazil. So we bought coaches up from Brazil. And from my experience, that was an eye opener because I was very fortunate to travel down to Brazil on about 5 occasions to help train those guys before they came up to work for Tetra Brazil with us. And it was just a totally different experience because we had big training sessions in the UK with our staff. And it was always interesting asking our coaches, hey, what do you want to get out of this experience? And it was all about, hey, I want to meet American women. I want to get the opportunity to live in big houses because soccer over here obviously was seen as a middle-class sport. But then when you ask the same questions to the Brazilian coaches, 99% of them would say, hey, I want to visit the US because I want to improve my English. And it was more of a communication thing for them. But I learned so much being down there, just the different methods you use. Music obviously is a big thing down there. Watching the coaches clapping and using rhythm as part of the practices was very interesting. And always remember doing a session, and there was a couple of older guys there, and I was doing a demonstration on shooting. And I thought I was a pretty good demonstrator at the time. But at the end of the session, the two guys came up to me and said, do you realize that when you actually strike the ball, your hands are clenched? And I'd never even thought of that. And they were just thinking on a totally different level about when you strike the ball, you should be relaxed. And so just little things like that I picked up.
And now a quick word about one of our partners.
Hey, Kick It 3v3 soccer fans. It's Danny here with a quick shout out and an amazing offer from our partners at Macron. If you don't know Macron yet, they're one of the largest suppliers of team uniforms to European clubs like Crystal Palace, Stoke City, and the famous Wrexham AFC. In fact, they've been expanding across the U.S. with a fantastic production facility in Connecticut. Zico and I got to visit the Connecticut facility personally, where we met with Alan and the production team. And let me tell you, they treat every club like champions. Whether you've got a couple hundred teams in your organization or thousands, they'll treat you like you're a big deal. It's that top-notch customer service that won us over. And thanks to folks like George Gurkinich, their U.S. rep, top-notch customer service is expected and delivered 100% of the time. If you mention Kick It 3v3 when you meet with George, and if you are a qualified prospect meeting with and accepting a proposal from Macron, your entire club will receive 10% off of the next Kick It 3v3 event you attend. So if your club needs high quality gear and a partner who truly cares, check out Macron. They are elevating the game for everyone.
And now back to the show.
But then when you ask the same questions to the Brazilian coaches, 99% of them would say, hey, I want to visit the US because I want to improve my English. And it was more of a communication thing for them. But I learned so much being down there, just the different methods they use. Music obviously is a big thing down there. Watching the coaches clapping and using rhythm as part of the practices was very interesting. And always remember doing a session, and there was a couple of older guys there, and I was doing a demonstration on shooting. And I thought I was a pretty good demonstrator at the time. But at the end of the session, the two guys came up to me and said, do you realize that when you actually strike the ball, your hands are clenched? And I'd never even thought of that. And they were just thinking on a totally different level about when you strike the ball, you should be relaxed. And so just little things like that I picked out. And like you said, in terms of the coaching experiences that I've had and what's made me a better coach, I intentionally, when I came over, because I've been working in a high school in the UK for 6 years, and as a PE teacher back there, you were working with groups of about 50 to 65 kids per session. So you're working with large groups, so you had to be organized. So when I came over here, obviously I started coaching with the Legends and then helped form Alliance FC with some of the other guys, Dave Morrow, Carl Eaton, Doug and Chris McLagan, which was a great experience. I had the fortune of having a very good team, which I started at under 8 and handed over at U16. And two of the players I had there were Matt Beasler and Seth Sinovic. So Matt obviously played for Sporting and played on the national team and played in the World Cup in Brazil. And Seth played for Sporting, obviously, for several years. So that was just a great experience. Just one of those once-in-a-lifetime opportunities where you've just got an unbelievable group of kids and an unbelievable group of supportive parents. So that was a great experience. But teaching kids at under 8, it's something I'd never done before. So that I wanted to do that to gain that experience. I also coached girls for several years. Again, back in the UK, when I left back in '89, girls just weren't playing soccer. It was purely a boy sport. So again, I wanted to push myself, push the envelope and coach girls, which I really loved, apart from getting slaughtered at the start of every practice because the color of my shirt didn't match with the color of the shorts, which is very important. But coaching girls is very different, the way you communicate. So like I said, from a personal development standpoint, coaching younger kids, coaching girls, boys. I've coached a lot of rec kids, coached some very competitive kids and teams. And I'd like to think I am very fortunate in, I'm a bit of a nutcase. So I love working with tiny tykes and mini kickers with the 4 and 5 year olds. I'm at their level mentally. I like to have fun working with them. So I think I'm just very fortunate. Like I can work with any age group and any ability, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, Zico, I'd love to hear you talk on that, because dig into that a bit, because I know everything you say to you is hitting your buttons.
Oh yeah, no, I think the communication has to be great with the youngest kids, but the biggest thing is more than the communication, the tempo.
Yeah,
to get them experiencing it and doing it, because probably like you, my wife doesn't care what I have to say. I doubt that these 5-year-olds are going to care what I have to say. So it's like, quickly get it going, quickly get it going. And what's cool is, and I guarantee you, all 3 of us would say this, get involved in the practice, get involved. And what I find is you can be very cerebral coaching 16-year-olds or whatever, correct, and stand quite a bit. But when I'm coaching, like you said, under 8, younger kids, under 5, under 6, whatever, man, I find that I'm sweating. I also find that I'm pumped up. And if I was coaching those kids late at night, I would be up till 3 in the morning. So hopefully you're done by 6 p.m. so you can start cooling down by 9 p.m. Correct?
Yeah.
I have a question, Alan. You were a PE teacher in Wales. You've coached the youngest kids. You've coached first generation female players, let's say, first, second generation female players, let's say. and British soccer camps in Challenger. And I remember 55,000 miles your
Yeah.
first year. Wow. And 1,000 peel off addresses or what have you.
Yeah, yeah.
You've been recognized by the Kansas Soccer Hall of Fame. How does that feel? How cool is that?
It was, yeah, I was very honored. To be recognized by your peers, I think is great. I just felt very honored by it. And yeah, that was a great night and great experience. And there's a lot of very well-known people in this community and the state of Kansas who are in there as well. And I just feel very honored and fortunate to be one of those people.
Awesome. Cool. Okay, so a couple other things. Primary focuses then, since all three of us have so much experience, to be honest, I don't mean that arrogantly, I mean that fortunately,
Yeah.
in coaching young kids. Can you just give a basic summary, let's say, on what you believe primary focuses should be, let's say, on coaching the youngest of the kids, 5 and 6, whatever, to U9, U10, and into teenage years, whatever? How would you break down the most important primary things we should focus on through those age groups?
Yeah, I think with my upbringing through doing physical education at college, being a physical education teacher for 6 years and being involved over here with mentors like Andy Barney, I think that the most important thing to me, particularly at the younger ages, is maximum participation. Everybody, that's why even on our camps, every child receives a soccer ball as part of the package. We always look at maximum participation. We try to avoid line drills wherever possible. Line drills are okay if you're in groups of 2 or 3. So there's lots of repetition because obviously technique is all about repetition. And people say practice makes perfect. It doesn't. Practice makes permanent. So if it's bad practice, it's going to end up in a bad result. So again, giving every kid a ball, having ball familiarity, making sure that every child is comfortable on the ball, with both feet and at different speeds. Because like you said, that tempo is important. I coached 2 weeks ago for the first time in a long time because I retired from coaching. As Dan knows, several years ago, I was director of coaching at KC Fusion, retired. And so having been on the field for several years and coached, there's a guy that works with Challenger, Rob Herringer, Dan may know. He was a coach of Benedictine for many years and worked with the United Soccer Coaches Association as the technical director. I helped coach one of his teams only because I'm now starting my own consultancy. So didn't have any modern or recent photographs of myself coaching. So got involved with that. And it was just interesting watching those boys, they're high school age boys. The speed of practice was very sedentary and trying to get into them about, hey, you need to practice at match speed because if you don't, come game time, you're going to be put under pressure. And if you're not used to practicing at that speed and that tempo, then you're going to struggle. So there's something constantly you got to keep working at. And for me, I've always been a great believer in trying something different. Several times we'd go in the parking lot and practice with a tennis ball, just because the feel of that and the size obviously is much different. If you're running and trying to control a tennis ball, it's a difficult technique. So I've always been a believer of trying to push the envelope with the players that I've worked with and the teams I've worked with. And sometimes just as a change, we'd play rugby or do something different, or just sit down and spend the practice just talking about, hey, why are we doing this? What are we getting out of it? And why do we enjoy it? And how can we enjoy it more? And I think the teams found those sessions beneficial. So like I said, I think and for me, it's important because again, if you've coached or had coached for as many years as I had to try to keep myself fresh. And otherwise it's so easy to get into that rut of doing the same thing week in, week out.
It's funny that you said that and you brought up a tennis ball because we do so much rote, I guess you'd call it, right? Ball work and repetition with my kids, and I love it. And if we go fishing, we take a soccer ball.
Right.
And we have daddy, daughter juggling records, daddy, son juggling records, family juggling records. And when you get in that 3 people juggling, it's tough because sometimes like my first touch took me where I can't go in this rhythm. Now I need to go back. And so it's pretty funny. And when you said tennis ball, about 12, 13 days ago, my daughter and I just got into and this leads to the next question. So what you said, the tennis ball, my daughter and I came up with a game, and the game was how many times we can head a tennis ball back and forth over the school fence. and it's a tennis ball and it's the forehead and we're juggling back and forth. And it was fun. So
How old is your daughter?
she's 10.
Wow. Holy
She's
cow.
10. Yeah, she's a juggling nut. She loves it. Juggle
Yeah.
over 100 with
Yeah.
the head.
And
Loves their balls.
disclaimer here, but it's out of respect. Zico's daughter has been heading the ball since I think she was 2, against all the soccer recommendations. But it's funny, she gets penalized. She was getting penalized at U Sports because she would head the ball like she was like Hugh Williams, a young Hugh Williams heading the ball, right? And she's still like one of the smaller Hugh Williams. Zico's one of the guys Alan mentioned earlier, who was just great in the air, and but heading the ball. But she's one of the smaller players on their team. But it's hard to stop her from heading the goalkeeper's punts that make it to midfield. She wants to be the one to that ball. And no other 10-year-old girl in the States wants to head the ball from a goalkeeper's punt. Go ahead, Zico. Sorry I interrupted, but I thought that was funny.
It's fun and we love it. And so we pound time with the ball because just the ball itself is fun, right? Just the bounce, the feeling. There's those balls that they're just like, they just have the smallest amount of cushion. They just feel so nice. And so we play with all different size balls, size 1, size 3, tennis ball, like I said. We have a little Nerf type ball that in the wintertime, when it's a little chilly and it gets dark early, we go and we do juggling. And we juggle with the little ball, and you can't put your foot down because we're working on the fine balancing muscles of the plant foot. Whenever we get on this one, now we focus and we're doing it on the other one. And it leads to the next question, which is what all 3 of us experienced. And it's playing on the street, not having a coach. So you got natural creativity and you guided how you were with the ball that day, hitting off whatever, right? And you started doing, like, how many of us, you receive it, you flick it up in the air with your chest, then you hit a volley. And that gets Wales into the World Cup, correct? And back when they had the great teams from the 80s, all the great players from the 80s, right? Nothing happened, but I had all the great players from the 80s. So you go from repetition and pounding mastery of the ball to creativity. How do you balance that? How do you notice that? Explain. What do you think about that?
I think creativity, to have creativity, you've got to have a basic foundation in the techniques and skills. We've got a division with a challenger now called Creative Skill Camps, and we have inflatable fields. And the idea is, hey, they're only 3-on-3, so they're not massive fields. Dan obviously is very familiar with the 3-on-3 format. Like I said, it's one of the challenges that we found is you've got to have activation centers around that field because you can only have 6 kids on that field at any one time. And on camps, we've usually got about 13 to 15 players within a group. So we have to have activation centers based around those fields. And I think it's important, you need to try to instill some form of technical coaching before you put them in that environment. Once you introduce opposition, now you're talking about skill, because technique is something you predominantly do individually. But once you introduce opposition, now you're talking about skill and speed of thought and creativity. And that was one thing that just amazed me. I played semi-pro. I was never going to make it as a pro player because I was fairly short and was not strong in the air. I was certainly not a Hugh Williams. I played as a sweeper predominantly, or as a winger, because I was pretty fast back then. But when I came over here, I did my full badge, which is like the UEFA A license now. I did that in 1985. I was one of the youngest people to accomplish that at the time. So I was very honored to do that. So I certainly learned a lot on those courses. But then when I came over here and did my USSF A and B license courses, there was a lot of pro players on those courses. Peter Vermees was in my group on the B license and the A license, and some very famous American pro soccer players again in those groups. And you just get in a circle and one guy in the middle or 2 guys in the middle, and they'd be playing the ball around and keeping possession. And for me, the main difference I saw there, both creativity, but again, speed of thought. And the speed of thought with these players, just naturally, I just looked like a complete idiot compared to those guys, because I just did not have that speed of thought or the correct decision in terms of which technique to use, which part of the foot to use, and all that type of stuff. And so that was really eye-opening for me to see players that close up. You could see why they made it as professional players, because there's just different class.
Yeah, the thing about small-sided soccer that is a great thing for
Mhm.
creativity. In fact,
Yeah.
that's what I would not have become the soccer player I became if it weren't for indoor soccer coming to Kansas City. And all of a sudden, I went from 11v11 soccer, where you touch the ball,
Yeah.
2 minutes a game, it feels like, to I would play. I always joke I'd play 8 to 10 nights a week because I would
Mhm.
find as many games as I could play in a week. And it's tight quarters, it's very quick. When the Kansas City Attack first came to Kansas City, and I played with
Yeah.
them for a couple of months, we did 11 on 11 on those All-American indoor
Mhm.
soccer fields, one touch, 11v11, one touch. And that, I went, holy crap, I have to think fast,
Yeah.
make quick decisions. I got to use the outside, the inside, whatever, chest, whatever, shoulder,
Yeah.
mostly on the ground. But it's like it's what makes or breaks a college quarterback trying to make
Yeah.
it in pros. It's
Yeah.
everything happens so much faster. The players aren't just physically, they're all fast. That's the thing. Against the Attack, I was definitely as fast as almost
Oh,
everyone,
yeah.
but Brian Haynes notwithstanding. But man, I could feel myself day after day, week after week, getting closer and able to compete
Mhm.
here. That was the biggest difference, with that speed of thought, making those quick decisions. And small-sided games, to your point, 3v3,
Yeah.
5v5, 4v4. That's why we use them in practices. A good way to, you can even say on a 3v3, guys, no passing. I just want you to get that ball and try to score.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you could make that a way to force some dribbling. When you could say just one touch. Now it becomes about quick decisions. So you could
Yeah.
change that up. So that's all. I really appreciate your feedback on that.
I just wish,
yeah.
living in America, obviously, when you live in the UK, it's the big sports are soccer and rugby and cricket. They're the three predominant sports over there. Over here, getting a chance, my kids played basketball, baseball, t-ball. I would get so frustrated watching those practices. And again, to be fair, the practices are run predominantly by parents who are volunteers. But again, it's so frustrating to watch, even to this day, when I drive past fields and you see these kids on baseball. And we always focus on maximum participation, so everybody's working either individually or in pairs. And you see these kids, these little toddlers, standing on a baseball field with the coach knocking the ball up, and the kids are just standing there. It just frustrates the living daylights. And basketball's the same to a point. You get a lot of line drills and stuff like that. So I'd love to get involved in coaching some of these other sports. I don't know how long I'd last before somebody probably kill me, but I think there's a lot to be learned from the way that we've developed coaching techniques and trying to get maximum participation as best we can.
Yeah, I think even when I go ahead, Zico. Sorry.
I was actually trying to break in there and ask you that question, and you just answered it. Is what are some of the issues that you find in youth coaching? And I think you addressed that just now, because you went off on that rant, but that's great. That's what I wanted to ask you. I've heard it this way, right? Avoid the 3 evil L's. We've probably heard that. No laps, no lines, no lectures.
Yeah.
And American sports seem so coach dominated, right?
Yeah.
It's all about the coach, and the coach decides when to call a timeout. And I've always said in basketball, the average basketball player in the NBA makes $11 million a year, and then they need to call a timeout to address how they're going to tackle the next 3 seconds of the game. Who's going to throw it to who and whatever. And it's just like, man, this is coach dominated, where our game, and you've already touched on it, problem solving and creativity. Man, we need the players to do that, because we don't have timeouts.
Yeah.
We have pregame, we have halftime, and then we summarize it at the end, correct? Beyond soccer skills and everything else, explain how you see, and with young coaches, explain how you see that we develop players' character, confidence. What are some things you do to develop the kid as a whole, knowing that so many kids quit sports because of poor coaching? Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I think communication's the key. As a young coach, the way you communicate both in a practice and particularly in a game. Having been a director of coaching at several clubs for many years, the coaches I had, the biggest problems were those who didn't communicate, particularly with the parents. They communicate with the players, but then in games, you'd see them do the team talk before the game. Halftime, they'd get the kids, another team talk at the end of the game. They'd get the kids and take them to the opposite side of the field and then chat to them. And I've always been a massive believer of, hey, communicate to the parents at the same time. Because at least the parents are getting an understanding of what your philosophy is all about and what you're trying to achieve, whether it's and I do the same at the end of every practice. I bring all the parents over, I bring the kids over, and I say, this is what we worked on today. This is what we did. This is what we're going to try to focus on in the next game, because the game is the teacher. And again, as being a player, one of the toughest times for a player is that drive home after practice or a game, where the parents are, and my dad was one of the worst, he'd be lecturing me about what I did or didn't do and all this sort of stuff. But again, communication is so important, because the parents may not agree with what you're saying, but at least they've got an understanding as to what you're trying to do. And again, if a parent disagreed, then my philosophy was, hey, come and talk to me and let's discuss it. And I'll try and explain my rationale behind what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to achieve. But let's not do it after a game, because we all get very emotional during games. Practice is not so much. I didn't have a problem doing it after practice, but certainly after games, it's not the best time to be talking to individual parents about their child's development or something like that. But I just felt at the end of the game, bringing everybody in and explaining everything about what we did well, what we need to keep working on, and giving praise. I've always been a massive proponent of positive reinforcement. Like I said, I think that's vital. Everybody needs to achieve success. And again, as I coach, one of the things that I've learned over the years is always try to give individual achievable goals. So within a practice, we know, and a lot of the groups I work with are not teams as such, but just groups of players who have got mixed abilities. But what I try to achieve in a practice is say, well, let's say we're doing a drill on passing, and we say, right, I'm going to give you 1 minute to see how many passes you can get or how many touches on the ball you can get. And then we'll ask, what's the score? And we all know what kids are like. I got 2, I got 3, I got 20. They all make up the scores, bless them. But then what you do then is to say, I want you to remember what score you had. I'm going to give you another minute, and I want to see, can you beat your last score? So I'm setting achievable goals to each individual. I'm not saying, right, within a minute, I want everybody to get 30 touches on the ball. Because if the coach is imposing those demands on the players, 1 or 2 kids may achieve that. The vast majority won't. Again, from a player's perspective, hey, from a self-esteem perspective, if I fail the coach or I fail to achieve what the coach wanted me to achieve, how am I going to feel? And again, as a coach, there's ways you can guarantee success by, excuse me, I just got to do this for a minute, by giving them more than 1 minute on the second occasion. So again, what I'll do, I'll watch one player the first time, and then I'll watch the same player the second time, and I'll make sure that player has beaten their last score, because in the hope, I may give them a minute 15, maybe 30.
I feel like that all the time to make it work.
Yeah. And again, you're at the end of that one, said, put your hands up if you beat your last score. I don't care what you had. If you had 3 the first time or 4 the second time, great. If you had 20 the first time and 25 the second time, great. But again, the important thing that, I've always tried to instill in players is be honest, because if you're not going to be honest with yourself, you're cheating yourself. You're not cheating me, you're cheating yourself. So I've always tried to instill organization. I was always a big, hey, before the game, when I was a kid, Dan, you guys were probably the same. The night before, I'd get my kit together, I'd clean my boots, I'd have everything together. My son, who went to Cardiff, he just drove me up the wall, because every 5 minutes before we due to leave, oh, where's my cleats? Where's my shin guard? And I used to drive me up the wall. Getting that organization, being honest with yourself, being honest with your parents, and working well at school is important. And I remember one time we were playing in a tournament with the Alliance boys, with Matt Beasley's team and Seth's team, playing down in Memphis. And we were going by bus, and we were on the bus ready to go. We were waiting for one player to show up, and he was having an argument in the parking lot with his parents because he hadn't done his homework. And I said, you're not coming. And he didn't come. And I said, hey, you need to learn your lesson. You've got to get your schoolwork done, because I'm not having players on here who are cheating on the. So that didn't go down well with him. But I think, and I still keep in touch with him from time to time, I think he'd be honest to say, hey, it was a tough decision at the time, but I think I learned from it and made me a better person. So those life skills, I think, are very important. Being respectful to other people, being respectful to your teammates, being respectful to your coach, being respectful to your parents, all key life skills.
That man, you covered everything there. I think there's been a misnomer amongst coaches that I've coached with in some scenarios where they say, give me a team of orphans and I'll be a happy coach. And which I get, because sometimes the parents can get in the way. But I have found that when the parents are educated on what you're trying to accomplish, I've had situations where my team, when my daughter was 7, it wasn't a team I recruited. I just took what I got. I coached them well. And so we'd always get bumped up from the mid lower division to the upper division, which everybody recruited. All those teams we played against were a head taller. So we'd go up for a season, we get our butts kicked, and we move back down and we'd beat everybody because we didn't have I wasn't recruiting big kids.
Yeah.
Perfectly.
Yeah. But what would happen is we would play the team that was used to smoking everybody 12-0, and they would only beat us 6-2. And their parents would be losing their minds. Their coach would be so mad. And my parents were so happy. They're like, wow, our girls are playing against these huge kids. They're outskilling them. They're competing. And the other team would look at my parents and not understand how they could be so happy about their daughters losing 6-2. And it was because they saw their daughters improving week over week.
Yeah.
And they also looked at the other team going, these guys are all a head taller than us. This is amazing. They're only beating us 6-2. So I've been pleasantly surprised that over the years, when I educate the parents and those kids that stay with you the longest, their parents really buy into it. You said your most successful team that you gave up when they were 16, but you had to from 8 on. You had the parents buy in. They understood what you were trying to accomplish. And every once in a while, you'll get 1 or 2 parents who don't agree and they move on. And they probably shouldn't be on your team to begin with because they're going to cause problems.
And I think with that, you've got to understand as a coach what your strengths and weaknesses are. And the reason I handed that team over at U16, I handed them over to Gareth Hughes. I don't know whether Gareth Hughes, another Welsh guy came out back in the day, another very good player and a great coach. I handed the team over to him because he was far more familiar with the college recruiting process. I'd never been involved with the recruitment process. We were traveling a lot at that time with that team. And again, I had 4 kids. I was working full-time for Challenger. I had some real estate investments at the time. And I just said, look, I can't keep doing this. And it's not fair on the players and not fair on the parents for me not to give them that opportunity to be with a coach who's far more familiar with the college recruitment process, understands what they need to do. And again, it was a tough decision at the time, but I know, and I still keep in touch with a lot of those parents and even the players. We had a reunion when Matt Beasler got inducted into the Hall of Fame of Sport a couple of months ago. So we met up then. And like I said, I never regret that decision. And I think the players appreciate what I did to give them that opportunity to have a different voice and a different perspective and far more experience and specialization of what they needed at that time in their development.
And you said Matt Beasley. That's the guy.
Matt Beasley,
played for you, and then he played for the United States national team. That's a good segue for this. We only have a few more minutes. Man, we all could talk like we have with Andy Barney and Dave Morrow and all these guys till 3 a.m, but we're sober, so we know we have a time limit right now. But let's talk about World Cup. Like, I'm curious about your greatest past memories of World Cup, what you're excited about for this year, who your teams are, and maybe your feedback on the U.S. national team and thoughts there.
Yeah, it's World Cup. My fondest memories are 1970, the Brazilian team at the time. You had the likes of Pelé, Tostão, Rivellino, Jairzinho, all those players, just an unbelievable team. Talk about creativity and flair. Italy obviously was another powerhouse. Germany, England. Being Welsh, I've never been a huge England supporter, which always goes down well with my buddies. But so, like I said, those are the teams that I used to support. Wales, obviously, unfortunately, never got there and have been. We're such a small country and we've got such a small pool of players to choose from that I remember. And one of the questions I know you'd sent me in advance is, what do you think of the US men's national team and what are their chances? And I think we've got a long way to go. And it starts at the youth level. I think the pay-to-play model that we have here puts a lot of kids to a disadvantage. I've spent a lot of my time recently working with kids in underserved communities. They just built a brand new turf field here in Kansas City on 9th and Van Brunt. in one of the underserved communities down there. And it was just great. We did a session down there, and these kids don't have the same opportunities as the kids in the suburbs. They don't have the turf fields to practice on, and they don't have the quality of coaching, and they don't have the equipment. And so, like I said, that's really become a passion of mine, because we all know there's unbelievable talent sitting there just waiting for that opportunity. And you go coming from Brazil, similar, much more of that type of environment than even the UK. My time in Brazil, driving past the favelas and seeing the poverty there, and the chance for any individual in that community to play at the pro level and make a career, not just for themselves but their families, is just unbelievable. But you need a bit of luck. I remember when Wales played in the Euros back in 2016. We went to France to watch them play, and before getting there, I didn't think we had a chance in hell of getting in anyway. I went to the first game, and we ended up losing to Portugal in the semi-final, and that was one of those events that said, hey, if you have a bit of luck and you've got passion and you've got heart and you give 150%, then anything can happen. Like I said, it's just, I think the women's game obviously has been so strong here for so many years, which is great. The rest of the world is certainly catching up, which is also great. And even in the World Cup, back in the days, you used to have the usual suspects, the Germanys and the Italys and the Brazils, France and Spain and all those. But now you've got all these developing countries who can get to the World Cup, but get there and do very well, even against some of the best countries in the world. Anything can happen. Who are my favorites? I always love Brazil. I'm hoping Wales qualify. We haven't got there yet, but we may have a better chance after this week. But I'd love to see Wales get here, because I'd love to see them play in the States. And my dream would be that they get in and play in Kansas.City.
Kansas.City.
That would be a dream come true if I could afford a ticket. Yeah. So we'll see.
It's just, man, this has been wonderful talking with you about all this. Yeah, I have Kansas City Sporting season tickets. I was hoping that would help me get a leg up on getting some tickets to World Cup match there, and it's a little bit of a leg up. But if you have a leg and $2,000,
yeah.
So it did allow me. I was at that Messi game in Kansas City last year.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, and because I had season tickets to Sporting, I had great seats right behind the bench where Messi was, and Arrowhead was rocking, and all the guys I played college ball with, we tailgated outside Arrowhead Stadium, or whatever they're calling it nowadays. We know it's Arrowhead. But
they've got a job available at the moment as FIFA's head of Kansas City World Cup. So my wife wants me to apply for that, but I'd have no chance. And I said, that's when you'd find who all your friends are. If I did have that job, you'd have everybody in the world contacting me for free tickets and all that stuff. So I said, yeah, it's I've got no chance. Yeah, I would. Yeah.
Yeah. You'd be Taylor Swift in Kansas City for the summer. Anyway, hey, it's just been amazing talking with you. Zico has to actually head off and coach. He's got a hard stop coming up here. He's going to be a few minutes late to coach. But man, I really appreciate getting to know you better, Alan. I just knew you from I just know you from teaching me as a coach and connecting over the last year on some soccer stuff. It's been fun. But thank you so much for your time.
And your first guest ever.
What was that?
And our first guest ever.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're our first guest.
It can only go up from here.
You set the bar.
Somewhere.
Yeah, correct.
We'll find out where.
We appreciate it. Zico, it's great to meet you, buddy. Danny, always great to meet you, bud.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Kick It 3v3 Soccer podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube at Kick It 3v3 Soccer or your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on Facebook at Kick It 3v3 and Instagram at Kick It 3v3 Soccer. And for the latest schedules and information about 3v3 action throughout the U.S., visit kickitsoccer.com. Big shout out to our sponsors, Macron and SmartWave Solar. We couldn't do all this without you. And of course, our Kick It 3v3 customers. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you and the children, the parents, the families, the coaches that enjoy Kick It 3v3 Soccer. Until next time, keep the ball moving, and we'll see you on the pitch.
And now some special offers from our partners.
Hey, Kick It 3v3 Soccer fans. It's Danny here with a quick shout out and an amazing offer from our partners at Macron. If you don't know Macron yet, They're one of the largest suppliers of team uniforms to European clubs like Crystal Palace, Stoke City, and the famous Wrexham AFC. In fact, they've been expanding across the US with a fantastic production facility in Connecticut. Zico and I got to visit the Connecticut facility personally, where we met with Alan and the production team. And let me tell you, they treat every club like champions. Whether you've got a couple hundred teams in your organization or thousands, they'll treat you like you're a big deal. It's that top-notch customer service that won us over. And thanks to folks like George Gurkinich, their US rep, top-notch customer service is expected and delivered 100% of the time. If you mention Kick It 3v3 when you meet with George, and if you are a qualified prospect meeting with and accepting a proposal from Macron, your entire club will receive 10% off of the next Kick It 3v3 event you attend. So if your club needs high quality gear and a partner who truly cares, check out Macron. They are elevating the game for everyone. Soccer families, we all know that soccer expenses add up. So here's a way to save at home and help your soccer team. We're partnering with SmartWave Solar, serving Colorado and Utah only, because they make going solar simple with 2 quick online meetings and a free no pressure quote. How do I know? I just recently had my SmartWave solar system installed. I've been looking to add solar to my house for years, but I was tired of the misleading ads and those high pressure, you have to decide today sales tactics. A friend of mine who'd had SmartWave solar for 2 years and was super happy introduced me to SmartWave just a few months ago. SmartWave didn't use any high pressure tactics. They saved me 40% over the other quotes I got and made sure I received all the tax incentives I was due. And here's the kicker. When you book a meeting with their local rep, Steve, through Kickit, SmartWave will help sponsor your team by covering 50% to 100% of your tournament fees, or provide 3v3 custom Macron uniforms for your next 3v3 tournament. Learn more and book your meeting with Steve at kickitsoccer.com/solar. That's kickitsoccer.com/solar, spelled SOLAR. Make sure you tell them that Dan from Kickit sent you.